Stupid little puppet. The words exploded across the chamber, cruel, sharp, and dripping with arrogance. They came from the mouth of Donald J. Trump, the 47th President of the United States, a man who now controls more political power than any leader in modern American history. Before him stood Jasmine Crockett, the lone warrior of justice, branded, mocked, and underestimated. But behind the insult lies a battle that could decide the fate of over 330 million Americans, a nation already fractured by race, violence, and injustice. For every insult hurled, there are tens of thousands of voices silenced. For every smirk of power, there are millions who still believe in truth. And in this chamber, broadcast to over 50 million homes, two forces collide: the might of a president and the defiance of a woman who refuses to bow. This is not just a hearing, it is a war of words, power, and destiny. The chamber was a theater of tension. Rows of wooden desks gleamed under the harsh white lights, polished so fiercely that the reflections of the cameras bounced back into the eyes of the press corps. The air itself seemed thick, humming with the faint crackle of broadcast equipment, with the restless coughs of lawmakers, with the shuffling of papers that no one was actually reading. Dozens of cameras, black, unblinking, merciless, swung on their tripods, adjusting, zooming, searching. They weren't merely recording, they were dissecting. Every gesture, every twitch of the face, every slip of the tongue would be carved into digital permanence. Whispers cascaded across the chamber like a ripple of wind before a storm. Reporters leaned close to one another, murmuring predictions, trading sharp smiles, already sketching headlines in their minds. Above it all, perched on the dais, the presiding officer tapped the gavel against polished oak. Not yet to command silence, just enough to remind everyone, history was about to be written. Then came the shift. The side doors swung wide and in walked Donald J. Trump. He did not merely enter, he occupied. Surrounded by aides in tailored suits, the former real estate mogul turned commander-in-chief carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had bent nations to his will. His tie blazed red, almost theatrical under the lights, the knot pulled so tight it seemed like a weapon in itself. His hair, immovable as ever, caught the glow of the cameras, and his expression, that half smirk, half snarl, told the world that he wasn't here to be questioned. He was here to conquer. Gasps rose, scattered applause clapped from his loyalists in the chamber. Opponents stiffened in their seats. Even those who despised him felt the undeniable weight of his presence. Trump raised a single hand in a casual wave. The cameras clicked like machine guns, a barrage of shutter sounds drowning out the whispers. Then silence, because at the opposite end of the aisle, another figure appeared, Jasmine Crockett. She stepped into the light without entourage, without fanfare, but with a presence just as electric. Dressed in a deep navy suit that clung with sharp lines of authority, she looked less like a politician and more like a warrior armored for battle. Her walk was steady, unhurried. Each step echoed on the marble floor like a drumbeat. Her chin lifted slightly, but not in arrogance, in defiance. Her eyes did not wander, did not search for approval. They locked directly on the man seated across the chamber, Trump. And for a heartbeat, the two simply looked at each other. It was not silence. It was voltage. Like two storm fronts colliding above a fragile city. Spectators held their breath. Reporters forgot to type. Even the presiding officer's gavel paused in midair, as if reluctant to break the spell. The divide was palpable. On one side of the chamber sat Trump's loyalists, jaws clenched, eager to see their champion crush another enemy of the people. On the other, Jasmine's few allies leaned forward, thinly veiled hope in their eyes, knowing the odds were stacked but praying for a miracle. And beyond these walls, across America, millions of television screens flickered. In suburban living rooms, in dimly lit bars, in nursing homes and bustling city apartments, citizens leaned closer to the glow. Some clenched fists, some muttered curses, some whispered prayers, because they knew this was no ordinary hearing. This was theater, this was trial, this was battlefield. Jasmine reached her seat and did not look away. She placed her binder on the desk, fingers brushing the surface as if she could feel the weight of every truth contained within. Trump leaned back in his chair, lips curving. He mouthed something, inaudible to the microphones, but clear to the camera zoomed too close. Stupid little puppet. The insult lingered in the air like smoke, curling, choking. Some chuckled nervously. Others scowled. Jasmine did not flinch. Her hands folded neatly atop the desk. Her spine remained straight, her eyes unwavering. And yet, if one looked closely enough, behind the calm exterior flickered a fire. A determination so fierce that it seemed ready to shatter the marble columns themselves. The presiding officer finally brought down the gavel. A thunderclap of wood on oak. All rise. The hearing will now come to order. The chamber shifted as everyone stood, the creak of chairs and the scrape of shoes on polished floor echoing like a single drawn breath. Cameras zoomed tighter. The world leaned in. Trump's smirk widened, basking in the drama. Jasmine inhaled once, steady and sharp, her gaze never leaving him. And as they both lowered into their seats, the presiding officer's voice cut through the air with cold finality. Let the record show, this hearing has begun. The war of words had officially ignited, and America, fractured and trembling, was about to witness a storm unlike any other. The gavel's echo still vibrated through the chamber when Donald Trump rose to his feet. He didn't rush. He never rushed. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture designed for the cameras, for the spectacle. The chamber quieted, though not out of respect, out of anticipation. Everyone knew that whatever he was about to say would not be cautious, or diplomatic, or restrained. It would be fire, and fire demands oxygen. Trump adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and leaned forward toward the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice low but charged. We are here today not because I have done wrong, but because one woman has decided to make herself bigger than America. The words sliced cleanly through the silence. His gaze shifted toward Jasmine Crockett, his lips curling into that half-sneer, half-smile that millions recognized. This woman, he jabbed a finger across the chamber, is a political vandal. She is here to tear apart the very foundations of this country. She calls it justice. I call it chaos. A rumble of approval rolled through his supporters. Some pounded the desks. Others nodded vigorously, their faces lit with loyalty. Trump didn't pause. He thrived on momentum. She stands here pretending to defend the people. But what has she really done? She has lied, manipulated, poisoned the well of truth. She is not a guardian of democracy. She is its enemy, a traitor. The word cracked like a whip. Traitor! The chamber erupted. Shouts of agreement rose like flames catching dry grass. That's right. She's un-American. Reporters scrambled to capture the soundbite. And still, Jasmine sat silent. She did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. Her hands remained folded on the desk, her back straight as steel, her eyes locked on Trump. Cold, steady. But if the cameras dared to zoom in, if they sought her eyes closely enough, they would see not fear, not anger, but a glacier of defiance. Trump, emboldened by the frenzy he had ignited, leaned closer to the microphone. You want to know what this is really about? It's not about me. It's not about her. It's about power. She doesn't want me to lead because I stand in the way of her radical agenda. She doesn't want your voices heard because your voices terrify her. That's the truth. He slammed a palm against the desk. The microphones crackled, amplifying the boom like a cannon shot. Gasps, cheers, shouts. The chamber became a boiling pot of noise. Look around. Trump gestured broadly, sweeping the room with his hand. Does this look like democracy to you? No. This is a witch hunt, a circus, and she, his finger stabbed toward Jasmine again. She is the ringleader of this fraud. Another wave of cheers surged through his loyalists. A few lawmakers even rose to their feet, clapping, their voices booming above the din. She's right, one of them shouted. Enough of this farce. Yes, another joined, standing tall. This is treason, disguised as truth. The crowd swelled with energy. Half the chamber rattled with agreement. The other half sat stiff and furious. The presiding officer hammered the gavel again and again, but it was like trying to command the ocean. And Trump thrived in the chaos. He spread his arms wide as if soaking in the storm he had summoned. All of this, he declared, isn't about finding truth. It's about silencing me, silencing you, silencing America itself. And she, he pointed, voice dropping low, heavy with venom, is the puppet leading this disgrace. The chamber roared. The cameras captured every shout, every face twisted with rage or approval. On television screens across the nation, millions leaned closer, some nodding, some shaking their heads, but none unmoved. And through it all, Jasmine did nothing. Not yet. She sat in her chair, eyes locked, a statue of resolve. The insult still hung in the air, the word traitor still echoing like a drumbeat. But her silence was louder than the noise around her. For silence can be defiance. Silence can be power. Trump at last let his hands drop. He lowered himself back into his seat, exhaling sharply through his nose. The smirk of a man convinced he had landed a killing blow. The chamber buzzed, fractured between cheers and jeers. But one truth pulsed unmistakably. The gauntlet had been thrown. And as Trump leaned back, basking in the frenzy, the cameras shifted, catching Jasmine Crockett's face in a tight, unwavering close-up. Her eyes did not blink. Her jaw did not soften. And in that moment, though she had not spoken a single word, the tension in the room shifted. The battle lines had been drawn. Trump's opening strike was finished. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a challenge. The silence stretched long enough to suffocate. Reporters froze with pens hovering midair. Supporters held their breath, waiting to see if Jasmine Crockett would finally shatter it. And then she rose, slowly, deliberately. The scrape of her chair against the marble floor echoed like steel against stone. Her movements were precise, not dramatic like Trump's, not hungry for applause. They carried the quiet authority of someone who knew that her next words would matter more than volume, more than noise, more than spectacle. She approached the microphone, her heels clicking like the march of inevitability. Her gaze swept the chamber, cold, measured. Then finally it fixed on Trump. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice calm but carrying a razor's edge, "you speak of chaos. You speak of lies. You call me a traitor. But the only betrayal here—" She paused, letting the silence draw the chamber tighter around her words. "Was yours." Gasps rippled like wind over a restless sea. Jasmine reached into her folder and pulled out a stack of documents. She held them high so that the cameras could devour every page. "These," she declared, "are financial records. Transfers routed through shell companies, hidden accounts offshore, money that doesn't belong to you, but somehow found its way into your empire." The air in the chamber constricted, the shuffle of papers, the frantic clicking of cameras, the thunder of reporters scribbling furiously. Jasmine laid the documents flat on the desk before her. Millions of dollars, funds laundered, funneled, concealed. Proof that while you call yourself a defender of America, you've been profiting in the shadows, feeding off the very nation you claim to serve. The chamber froze. Even those who had cheered Trump minutes before now leaned forward, unable to look away. At home, millions of viewers sat transfixed, televisions glowing like portals into a truth they had always suspected but never fully seen. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if Jasmine had landed her blow. And then, Trump laughed. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't nervous. It was loud, mocking, a laugh that filled the chamber with disdain. "Fake," he barked, slamming his fist against the desk. "It's all fake. Forged papers, fabricated lies. This is exactly what I've been saying. The witch hunt. Nothing here is real. Nothing." He spread his arms wide, reveling in the performance, turning to the cameras as if addressing the nation directly. "They want to scare you with numbers and paperwork, but paperwork can be manufactured. Money trails can be invented. This is propaganda, plain and simple." The chamber erupted again, half with cheers, half with jeers. But Jasmine did not flinch. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice sharpened to a blade's edge. "Then perhaps," she said, "you'd like to hear it not from me, but from someone who once stood by your side." The chamber stirred. She gestured toward the witness stand. All eyes turned as a man in a gray suit rose nervously to his feet. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but there was no mistaking who he was. A former financial aide to Trump, long rumored to be the keeper of secrets no ledger could hide. Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed in like predators on prey. Jasmine nodded to him. "Tell them what you told my office. Tell the truth about those accounts." For a moment the man hesitated, glancing around the chamber like a cornered animal. And then he spoke, but not the words Jasmine had expected. I never said that," he stammered, voice weak but audible. "These documents, they're not what she claims. I was pressured. I never saw evidence of wrongdoing." The chamber convulsed in shock. Jasmine's head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath. But the microphones caught the sharp edge of betrayal. Trump's laughter boomed again, triumphant, cruel. "Did you hear that?" he roared, slamming his palm down again. "The so-called witness just told you everything you need to know. This whole case is a sham, a disgrace. She's inventing lies because she has nothing real to offer." His supporters howled with approval, standing, clapping, chanting. The chamber shook with noise. Jasmine's papers lay flat before her, suddenly looking fragile, powerless against the roar of denial and betrayal. The witness sat back down, eyes fixed on the floor, his shoulders hunched in shame or fear. And for the first time, the camera turned to Jasmine not as a triumphant warrior, but as a woman staring into the maw of sabotage. Her jaw tightened, her knuckles whitened around the edges of the desk. And yet, her eyes. The fire remained. Not the fire of easy victory, but the fire of someone who had been wounded, cornered, betrayed, and was already calculating the counterstrike. The camera zoomed closer. Her face was rigid with tension, her lips pressed thin, but her eyes burned bright, unyielding. The chamber had seen her stumble. The nation had watched her weapon falter. But in that fire, in that gaze, there was no surrender, only promise. Promise that she had not yet unleashed everything she carried. And the storm was only beginning. The chamber did not grant her mercy. No sooner had the witness slumped back into his seat than the murmurs began. Murmurs that swelled into voices, voices into accusations. "Unsubstantiated," one senator barked. "Fabricated evidence," another shouted, pounding his fist against the desk. The chamber rippled with agitation. Reporters craned forward, scribbling like they were feeding on blood. Viewers at home could feel the shift, the tide turning, the predator's circle closing around Jasmine Crockett. The air grew heavier, each accusation adding weight to her shoulders. Yet Jasmine did not move. Her hands gripped the folder before her, knuckles paling as she held it like both shield and weapon. She could hear the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and steady in her chest, like a drum calling her back to focus. Her breath deepened, her spine straightened. She would not falter, but the chamber did not stop pressing. From the far side, a senator with a booming voice rose and pointed his finger toward her. "This is political theater," he thundered. "This woman has no respect for the process, no respect for truth. She comes here with forged records, with unreliable witnesses, and dares accuse a former president?" The crowd erupted, some cheering his words, others jeering them. The sound fractured the chamber into pieces, into tribes warring under one roof. And above it all, Trump sat back in his chair, relaxed, amused. His lips curved into a slow, deliberate smirk, as if he were savoring Jasmine's unraveling like fine wine. Every insult hurled at her seemed to sharpen his grin. Jasmine glanced at him, not long, just long enough to catch the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. It only hardened her resolve. Still, the attacks rained down. "She's wasting our time. Dangerous lies. A disgrace to this chamber." Each voice struck like a lash across her back, and yet she stood there, still, anchored by the fire that refused to leave her. Her hand tightened around the folder. The paper edges cut faintly into her palm, but she welcomed the sting. Pain grounded her. Pain reminded her she was alive, fighting, and then came the deeper wound. From her own side. She turned, expecting her ally, a senator who had once spoken boldly in her defense, who had stood by her in previous storms, to rise now, to push back, to at least steady the ship. But he remained seated, his eyes averted, his hands folded neatly on the desk, as if he were no more than a spectator in someone else's battle. She waited for his voice, for one word, one signal of solidarity. None came. The silence from him was louder than any insult. It was abandonment, cold and cutting. Trump noticed too. His smirk deepened. He leaned back further, one arm draped over the chair like a monarch surveying a conquered court. The cameras caught every detail. Jasmine, standing alone amid the chorus of condemnation. Her ally's silence glaring. Trump's quiet triumph, chilling. And yet, her resolve did not fracture. Her chest tightened, yes. Her throat burned with the bitterness of betrayal. She could feel the loneliness pressing down, squeezing her into the smallness they wished for her. But she refused. Her eyes lifted again, scanning the hostile chamber, then locking once more onto Trump. Her mind whispered, not yet, not finished, not defeated. The storm outside was chaos, but inside her, something else was growing. Sharp, unyielding, unbreakable. And the more they tried to isolate her, the more that fire burned. The session continued in chaos. Voices clashing, insults echoing. The chair's gavel pounded desperately for order, but order did not come. In the eye of the storm stood Jasmine, her heart steady now, her hands firm on the folder. Her silence was not weakness. It was patience. It was the silence of a warrior holding back her sword until the precise moment to strike. The chamber thought they had her cornered. Trump thought he had her broken. But the cameras, zooming close to her face, revealed the truth. Her jaw locked, her eyes steady, her fire unextinguished. She had been isolated, betrayed, drowned in accusations. And yet, in that dangerous isolation, she was sharpening herself, and the fight was far from over. The air was still thick with hostility when Jasmine lifted her head. Her voice, when it came, did not shout. It sliced. "Mr. Trump," she began, steady as steel, "you have spoken at length about loyalty to this nation, but only minutes ago, you declared that any senator who does not bend to your will is, in your words, an enemy of America." The chamber froze. "Tell me," Jasmine continued, her eyes narrowing, "is America defined by you or by its Constitution?" Gasps fluttered across the room. Trump's smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat, a fleeting crack in his armor, before he erupted in booming laughter. "Ha! Nice try, little puppet," he roared, his hands slamming against the desk as if he owned the room. "You twist words like a cheap lawyer. Everyone here knows what I meant. Don't play games with me." But the cameras had already caught it, the flicker of unease, the momentary stumble, and Jasmine, sensing it, pressed forward. "You speak of truth," she said, her tone sharper now. "Yet last month on live television, you swore you never had secret meetings with lobbyists tied to foreign money. And today," she snapped open a document, her fingers crisp against the page, "you admitted under oath that you consulted informally with them." She paused, letting the words hang heavy. "Which is it, Mr. Trump? No meetings or just informal ones?" The silence was electric. Trump leaned back, eyes narrowing. For the first time, his laugh did not come so quickly. Reporters in the gallery jolted forward, pens flying. On social media, the clip of Jasmine's question had already been replayed thousands of times, captions screaming, "Caught in his own words." "She's flipping the script." Trump's grin returned, wider than before, but the edges of it trembled. "You're desperate," he spat, pointing across the chamber. "You dig through scraps, twist meanings, call me a liar. That's your only weapon. Pathetic." His voice grew louder, the laughter exaggerated now, his insults pouring like a shield he built against the truth. But the louder he grew, the more it revealed what he was hiding. The audience watching at home could feel it. The shift in the air. One tweet exploded into thousands. "She's cornering him." Another viral clip emerged. Trump's words from last month, side by side with today's contradiction. The hashtags multiplied. The comment sections turned into battlefields, but for the first time the momentum tilted. Inside the chamber, Jasmine did not let up. "You can laugh all you want," she said, her voice low but caring, "but America deserves clarity. Was it a lie then, or is it a lie now?" Her words pierced through the noise. Trump opened his mouth, then shut it. He forced another laugh, but it came hollow this time, like a drum struck with a broken stick. The chamber felt it. The viewers felt it. And then from the back rows, a senator long known for his neutrality leaned forward, his brow furrowed, his eyes fixed on Trump. Not with admiration, but with doubt. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Jasmine caught it. So did the cameras, and so did Trump. The former president's smile tightened, his jaw working as though grinding invisible stone. For the first time in the hearing, he looked less like the untouchable giant, and more like a man on the defensive. Jasmine straightened, her folder still clutched in her hand, but her presence had grown taller, larger. She was no longer isolated, no longer just enduring the storm. She was bending it. The murmurs shifted. Reporters whispered furiously, sensing the pivot. Viewers online erupted into chants of support. "She's turning it around." See, Crockett's not backing down. The tide was moving, slowly but undeniably. And though Trump roared with laughter again, louder, grander, almost desperate, the sound no longer carried the weight it once had. It echoed, but it no longer silenced. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, the chamber and the country could see it. The warrior was rising, and the empire of words built on contradictions had begun to crack. Jasmine's pulse thundered in her ears as she reached for the weapon she had been saving. The video. It was her ace, her proof beyond doubt. Not just documents, not just words, but moving images, recorded truth that could shatter his denials in a single stroke. Her fingers hovered over the control, ready to unleash it onto the massive screen behind the dais. "This," she said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitability, "is not interpretation. It is not opinion. It is what he does when he thinks no one is watching." Every lens in the chamber swiveled toward her. Every microphone leaned closer. She pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. And then, black. Not a glitch of hesitation, but a full blackout. The giant display, the monitors on every desk, even the backup projection. All of it snapped dead in perfect unison. A ripple of confusion tore through the room. Reporters leapt from their seats. A low buzz erupted across the chamber, voices overlapping in disbelief. "What happened? Was it cut? Check the feed." Jasmine froze, staring at the empty screen. The evidence she had guarded like a blade had been ripped from her grasp in a single merciless instant. And then came the laugh. Slow, deliberate. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his grin slicing through the tension like a blade dipped in venom. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Seems even technology knows better than to trust you. Maybe the universe itself just doesn't want your lies shown today." His supporters erupted into laughter, pounding on their desks like a mob savoring blood. The sound echoed, cruel and merciless, a wall of mockery crashing over her. But Jasmine didn't hear them. Not fully, because behind the laughter, behind the chaos, her instincts screamed something sharper. This wasn't chance. This wasn't a malfunction. It was too precise, too perfect. The video hadn't failed. It had been silenced. Her eyes swept the room, scanning faces, searching for the tremor of guilt, the flicker of a glance that might betray the hidden hand. And there, a shadow, a figure among her own supposed allies, who had been near the technical console, now avoiding her gaze. A subtle shift, a silence too deliberate. Her stomach turned cold. There was a traitor inside. Trump leaned back, satisfied, his voice booming. "You see, ladies and gentlemen, she promised fire and gave us smoke. That's the whole story of her career. Empty threats, empty evidence, nothing." The crowd roared in approval. Jasmine's knuckles whitened around her folder. Her heart hammered, not from fear, but fury. She had been betrayed, not by the machine, not by chance, but by someone close enough to twist the knife at the worst possible moment. For a second, doubt tried to whisper in her ear that maybe they had won, that maybe the silence of the screen was the end. But then she breathed, and the fire returned. Her voice, though softer now, cut deeper than any scream. "Cut the feed. Cut the truth." "You think that protects you?" she said, her words measured, her gaze burning through the chamber. "All it proves is fear. Someone is terrified of what I carry, and when people are afraid, they expose themselves." Her words slithered through the laughter, poisoning its edges. The supporters' chants faltered, their certainty wobbling for just a moment. Trump waved a dismissive hand, barking another laugh, but his eyes flickered, a flash of unease, because even he knew she was right. Jasmine turned her gaze, sweeping across the chamber, daring every face to meet her eyes. Some faltered, some looked away, and in that subtle dance of avoidance, she marked them. Not all were enemies, but someone had cut the cord. The room was still roaring, still mocking, but for the first time, Jasmine wasn't focused on surviving their noise. She was hunting, and she would find the shadow. Trump smirked, savoring what he believed was victory, leaning back as if the throne were already his again. But Jasmine's silence was not defeat. It was calculation. And as the cameras zoomed in, capturing her face in sharp relief, jaw clenched, eyes ablaze, millions watching at home could see it. The warrior had been struck, but she was not broken. She was sharpening for the next blow. Jasmine rose slowly, her every movement deliberate, as though the silence of the chamber itself bent to her command. Her voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. But beneath that calm lay an edge so sharp it could slice through steel. "You want to call me a liar?" she said, her eyes fixed on Trump. "Then let's measure your truth." The room stilled. Her first arrow flew. "You swore to defend the Constitution, yet you incited a crowd to tear it apart." Her second. "You claimed to fight for working families, yet your companies hid millions offshore while your supporters struggled to pay rent." Another. "You railed against corruption, yet half your inner circle has faced indictment." Each word struck like a lash, each sentence carved into the air, leaving no room for retreat, no oxygen for excuses. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Cameras zoomed tighter. The audience in their homes gripped their screens, breathless. Trump smirked at first, rolling his shoulders as though her words were pebbles against stone. But as the list grew, as the contradictions piled one atop the other like bricks in a tomb, the mask began to crack. "You called the media fake news, yet quoted them when it served your story. You painted yourself as a champion of law and order, yet you broke federal statutes to silence voices against you. You demanded loyalty from patriots, yet abandoned your own allies when they no longer served you." The chamber was thick now, heavy, every syllable clinging to the air like smoke. Trump's hands clenched. His jaw worked. A flush spread across his cheeks, creeping like fire beneath his skin. Still, Jasmine pressed forward, relentless, unblinking. "You say you stand for truth, yet every time you are cornered, the story shifts. First denial, then distraction, then blame. You want the people to trust you, yet you treat them as pawns, as shields, as disposable pieces in your endless game. You built your empire on contradictions, and every lie you tell adds another crack." She paused. The silence swelled, unbearable. Then, with a voice like steel tempered in flame, she delivered the strike. "And today, Mr. Trump, those cracks are showing." The chamber erupted, not in applause, but in a stunned, electric silence, the kind that falls when truth is laid bare and no one dares to breathe. Trump slammed his hand against the desk. The sound boomed like thunder, desperate, furious. "Lies!" he barked, his voice straining, guttural. "All of it! Lies!" But his face betrayed him. His skin glowed crimson, sweat beading along his brow. His composure, once a fortress, now trembled, its walls quivering under the force of her assault. And Jasmine. Jasmine did not flinch. Her eyes locked on his, unyielding, merciless. She looked less like a politician, more like a warrior armed only with her tongue and her will, striking with the precision of a blade. Every viewer at home could see it. The power was shifting. It wasn't the video, it wasn't the documents, it wasn't even the blackout sabotage. It was her words, her fire. For in a world drenched in noise and manipulation, pure language, sharp, unbending, undeniable, was the rarest and deadliest weapon of all. Trump roared again, trying to bury her beneath volume. Dishonest! Treacherous! But the louder he shouted, the more desperate he appeared. His voice cracked. His gestures grew wild. And Jasmine stood still, perfectly still, as though every outburst was only further proof of what she had just revealed. Somewhere in the chamber, a murmur began. Low at first, but then it spread, growing, multiplying, until it was clear people were beginning to see. The contradictions she had laid bare could not be unseen. The questions could not be unasked. And for the first time, Trump's throne of noise no longer felt untouchable. Jasmine lowered her voice, steady, cutting through his rage with surgical precision. You can shout, Mr. Trump. You can pound your desk, but you cannot erase your own words. Her final arrow sank deep, and the room, once an arena for his dominance, now belonged to her. For a moment, the chamber was frozen. Jasmine stood tall, her silence heavier than thunder. Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the double doors at the back. Mr. Chairman, she said, her voice carrying like a blade across glass, I request that the committee call the next witness. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Another witness? At this stage, the doors swung open, and in walked a man the nation had not seen in months. The cameras snapped into a frenzy. Reporters gasped. Senators craned forward, whispering each other's names like a secret curse. Because the man who now stepped into the witness chair had once been closer to Trump than almost anyone alive. His former advisor, his strategist, the shadow who had stood at his right hand during the most critical hours of his presidency. The betrayal was palpable, a knife twisting not in Jasmine's hand, but in Trump's own history. The advisor raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat. His face was pale, jaw tight, as though he carried a weight too heavy for one spine. State your name for the record, the chairman said. And when the man spoke, the chamber quivered. His voice was low, steady, but each word carried the gravity of dynamite. He began to tell the story, a story of secret meetings in back rooms, where votes were not numbers of democracy but tokens to be bartered. A story of financial rivers flowing quietly under the surface, money rerouted, disguised, laundered through networks so complex that only insiders could trace their path. A story of manipulation, where rallies were not about conviction but choreography, where truth was an inconvenience and power the only currency. The chamber erupted, gasps, exclamations, chairs scraping. Reporters nearly fell over themselves, their fingers trembling on their keyboards, desperate to capture every syllable. Jasmine stood by, her expression a mask of calm, but her eyes burned with vindication. This was the card she had held close, the final weapon in her arsenal. And now it was cutting straight through the illusion Trump had built. But Trump only leaned back in his chair. A laugh erupted from his chest, rolling out across the chaos like a storm mocking the lightning. A traitor, he sneered, voice thick with disdain. A bitter little man who was cast aside. And now, what? He comes crawling here with his lies? You've bought him, Jasmine. That's all this is. Money, promises, a script written for weak men. His words sliced, but they could not mask the unease flickering behind his eyes. Because he knew, better than anyone, that this advisor did know things no one else could. Secrets too close, too dangerous. The room, though, was split. Some senators leaned forward eagerly, sensing blood in the water. Others shook their heads, dismissing it as theater, a desperate stunt. The lines of battle were redrawn in real time. The advisor, however, did not flinch. Mr. Trump can call me whatever he likes, he said, his voice steady, almost haunting. But I was there. I was in the room when the plans were made. I saw the ledgers. I heard the orders. I know the cost, and I know the truth. The words hung like a blade suspended above the chamber. And yet, something in his eyes betrayed him. A flicker, a shadow. As though even while confessing, even while detonating the truth, he was holding something back. Jasmine noticed it immediately. Her gaze sharpened. Faint tremor in his hand, the pause between his sentences, the way his jaw tightened each time Trump's name was spoken. There was more. So much more. The audience didn't see it yet, nor did the senators intoxicated by the spectacle before them. But Jasmine did. The man was speaking, yes. Revealing, yes. But beneath the words, he was hiding another truth. The storm in the chamber surged again. Questions flew from senators, shouts overlapped, the gavel pounded, but nothing could silence the tension. Trump's laugh grew sharper, harsher. "You'll regret this," he spat, jabbing a finger toward his former confidant. "You think betrayal will save you? No. You'll be remembered as nothing more than a fraud, a coward, a man who sold his soul because you couldn't stand in the light of real power." The advisor's lips tightened, but he said nothing. His silence for the first time felt louder than his testimony. Jasmine's chest rose and fell, a steady rhythm against the chaos. She held her folder tighter, her mind racing. This was not over, not even close, because her witness had cracked the door open to a cavern of secrets. But somewhere deep inside that cavern, something darker was still locked away. Something he wasn't saying, and Jasmine knew sooner or later she would have to drag it into the light. The cameras panned across the chamber, senators stunned, Trump seething, the witness pale and trembling, Jasmine unbowed. History was shifting, but the floor beneath their feet had only just begun to crack. Chaos swallowed the chamber. Senators shouted over one another, their voices clashing like steel on steel. Accusations hurled through the air. Lies! Perjury! National disgrace! Until the very walls seemed to tremble beneath the storm. Reporters leaned forward, their pens scratching furiously, cameras flashing, each desperate to capture the unraveling of history. The audience gallery roared, half with outrage, half with exhilaration, and at the center of it all sat the chairman, gavel pounding again and again, the sharp cracks swallowed by the uproar. "Order! This chamber will come to order!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. But order was a fantasy now. The hearing had slipped beyond his grip into the raw battlefield of will and words. In the din, Trump leaned forward, eyes burning. His smile was gone. His jaw clenched, a beast pacing inside his chest, ready to spring. Across the aisle, Jasmine stood like a pillar, her hands steady on the desk, her eyes locked on him. She did not flinch. She did not blink. For the cameras, it was as if the noise of the room dissolved, and only those two existed, the titan of the past and the warrior of the present. Two duelists circling, their weapons invisible, yet sharper than blades. Trump's gaze was venom, daring her to falter. Jasmine's stare was fire, daring him to strike first. Every word she had unleashed still hung in the air, every revelation from the witness still bleeding into the chamber's veins. But silence for this brief second was louder than everything. The committee chamber had transformed into an arena. And in that arena, the cameras caught it, the flicker in Trump's eyes, the calm fury in Jasmine's. Two gladiators, one throne of truth between them. The crowd's fury rose again, overlapping cries that blurred into chaos. Some shouted for Trump's honor. Some screamed Jasmine's name. Others demanded the witness speak further, to reveal the shadows he still carried. The chairman's gavel cracked again, desperate, almost frantic. "Enough! This is not a circus! Silence!" But the storm raged on, unstoppable. Jasmine inhaled slowly, each breath anchoring her against the chaos, her pulse a drumbeat of resolve. She could feel the weight of the chamber pressing against her spine. The air was thick, charged, as though lightning was waiting to split the ceiling. Trump leaned back at last, his smirk returning, brittle, forced. He spread his arms wide as though to say, "Look, they are with me. They always will be." But Jasmine caught the flicker, the shadow of unease buried beneath the performance. He was not invincible, not anymore. And yet, the fight was not won, not yet. The witness sat in silence, trembling fingers clasped together, eyes lowered, secrets still clutched tightly in his chest. Secrets that could turn the storm into a hurricane. The chamber quaked with anticipation. The tension did not break. It coiled tighter, pressing against lungs, against throats, until every heartbeat seemed synchronized with the pounding of the gavel. And then, suddenly, silence. Not peace, not calm, but the heavy, suffocating stillness that comes before the heavens crack open. The silence before lightning, the silence before war. The senators leaned back in their chairs, some pale, some flushed, some muttering prayers under their breath. The audience stilled, as though afraid even to breathe. Reporters froze, pens poised, waiting for the detonation they knew was coming. Trump's stare burned. Jasmine's fire did not waver. The air between them was electric, unbearable. And everyone in that chamber knew this was not the end. This was the storm's eye. The bows had bent, the earth had cracked, and what was coming would decide everything. Trump moved first. He leaned forward, both elbows planted on the table, his hands folded as though he were a king on a throne. His voice carried through the chamber, deep, deliberate, laced with menace. "You think this is about truth?" he said, the faintest curl of mockery on his lips. "This is about power, and power decides history, not little speeches." The words rippled across the room, heavy as iron. Several senators nodded unconsciously, pulled into his gravity. The crowd behind him stirred, voices murmuring assent. Then his smile widened, predatory. "I built empires. I bent nations. I've crushed enemies far greater than you, Congresswoman. Do you think you can stand against me and survive? Do you know what happens to people who oppose me? Their careers vanish. Their families suffer. Their names are ashes." Gasps broke from the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens tearing across the page. The tension tightened, a noose pulling at Jasmine's throat. Trump's voice rose, booming, filling every crevice of the chamber. "I can promise power. I can promise wealth. Align with me, and you rise. Stand against me, and you fall. That's not a threat. It's reality." He leaned back, basking in the echo of his own words, like a general who believed the battle already won. But Jasmine did not falter. Her hands remained steady on the desk, her heartbeat fierce but controlled. When she spoke, her voice was clear, precise, cutting through the noise like the edge of a blade. "Power without justice is nothing but tyranny," she said, "and tyranny has always fallen." The chamber stilled. Her words floated in the air, simple yet unshakable. Trump sneered, his voice snapping back like a whip. "Spare me the schoolbook lines. Justice is a story told by the victors. And I am the victor." Jasmine's eyes sharpened, unwavering. "Then why are you here defending yourself instead of celebrating your victory?" The question landed like a stone dropped in water. The ripples spread, murmurs through the chamber, heads turning, eyes narrowing. Trump's smirk twitched. He masked it quickly with a loud laugh, but the crack had shown. "You're clever," he said, pointing a finger across the table. "But cleverness is nothing without strength. I have armies of loyalists, fortunes that could drown nations. And you," he jabbed the finger harder, "you have words. What good are word?" Jasmine's reply was instant, steel-bound. "Words built constitutions. Words toppled empires. Words are what bind the people against tyrants, and you fear them, because they are stronger than you." The crowd gasped again. Some erupted in applause before the gavel struck down violently, the chairman shouting for silence. But the duel continued. Trump's voice turned darker, silk wrapped around steel. "You think the people are with you? Look outside these walls. Millions chant my name. They don't care about your so-called justice. They care about strength, prosperity, victory, and I gave them that." Jasmine inhaled slowly, then rose to her feet. Her voice rang out with the rhythm of conviction, each word striking like a drumbeat. "They chant because they were told to chant. They cheer because fear told them to cheer. But fear is fragile. Lies are fragile. And when the truth stands before them, unbroken, they will remember they are not slaves to your will." Her words crackled through the chamber, heavy with force, pulling eyes and ears toward her. Trump slammed a fist against the table, the sound like a gunshot. "Lies!" he roared, his face crimson, his composure slipping. "You twist, you slander, you spit poison. But you will be exposed. You will be destroyed." The room froze at his eruption. His mask had cracked, the fury beneath revealed. And Jasmine, calm amidst the storm, leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but devastating. Justice cannot be bought, and it cannot be destroyed. Not by your money, not by your threats, not even by you. The silence that followed was crushing. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, capturing the clash in every detail. The Titan trembling with rage, the warrior rooted in fire. It was no longer a hearing. It was chess played with the fate of a nation. Every word a piece moved, every silence a trap laid. Trump exhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, forcing his voice back into smoothness. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, almost a growl. "You'll regret standing against me." Jasmine's reply came without pause. "The only regret I would carry is staying silent in the face of corruption." The gavel slammed again, desperate, trying to close what could not be closed. "Order! Enough!" the chairman barked, though his voice was swallowed by the weight of the moment. But the duel had been fought, and though no verdict had yet been given, the air itself carried the truth. Something had shifted. The balance was not what it had been. And in the silence that lingered, everyone knew. This was not the end. It was the knife's edge, the breath before the plunge, the heartbeat before history breaks open. The silence was broken not by a voice, but by a sound. A sharp ping, then another, then dozens cascading like falling glass across the chamber. Screens lit up, phones buzzing, tablets flashing, laptops trembling in the laps of aides and reporters. Emails, audio files, documents, all dropped into inboxes at once, as though an invisible hand had pressed send to the entire world. The first headline appeared on a reporter's screen, bold, inescapable. Anonymous leak, Trump campaign emails, secret recordings, financial shells. Gasps cut through the room. The chamber erupted in noise, papers rustling, phones snapping awake, reporters leaping to their feet. The chairman slammed the gavel, but his voice drowned beneath the tidal wave. On the main monitor at the far end of the hall, text began to scroll. Encrypted once, decrypted now. Emails bearing Trump's signature, his inner circle's chatter, covert strategies to manipulate ballots, secret bank transfers routed through offshore accounts, billions siphoned in shadows. And then, the recordings. The speakers crackled to life. Trump's unmistakable voice filled the chamber, arrogant and unguarded. "They'll believe whatever we tell them. Push the fraud story hard. Money, don't worry, I've got streams no one will ever trace." The sound hit harder than any speech could. It was not accusation. It was confession. The chamber froze. Even Trump's allies stared at the screen, faces draining of color, hands trembling at the weight of undeniable proof. Jasmine did not move. Her eyes locked on Trump, unblinking, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. He, for once, was silent. His lips parted, but no words came. His face, usually an unshakable mask of bravado, had paled. Then he forced a laugh, thin, brittle, fake, doctored, digital tricks. Everyone knows hackers can manipulate anything. But the laugh cracked halfway through, his voice betraying a tremor. The recordings rolled on mercilessly. Conversations about funneling dark money into campaigns, about leaning on loyal senators to obstruct investigations, about silencing witnesses with promises of protection or threats of ruin. Each word pressed down on the chamber like a physical weight. Each revelation splintered the fragile defenses around him. One senator, once among his most vocal supporters, slowly pushed back his chair. He stood and walked out. Others followed. One by one, the loyal wall cracked, fissures widening with every revelation. Some sat frozen, eyes downcast, unable to face what they were hearing. The room felt less like a hearing now, and more like a battlefield, Trump's army disintegrating before his eyes. He slammed a fist against the desk, desperate. "This is war. You think a hacker can decide the fate of a nation? You think unverified garbage can destroy me?" But his words shook with strain. The certainty was gone. His voice betrayed him. And then, the twist. Because the files did not end with him. New names surfaced in the scroll of documents. Not just Trump's inner circle, senators, governors, donors with untouchable reputations, figures who had stood as arbiters of integrity now revealed as shadows in the same web. The chamber recoiled. Shock gave way to fear, fear to chaos. Because this was no longer the downfall of one man. This was contagion, a rot that spread further than anyone had dared to imagine. Reporters shouted questions into the air, voices overlapping in a storm. Does this implicate half the chamber? Who else knew? Was the election ever real? The chairman pounded the gavel, his face drenched in sweat. Order! Order! But order was gone. Trump tried again, his hands raised like a drowning man clawing for air. They're coming for all of us. Don't you see? If they can do this to me, they can do it to you. It's a witch hunt, bigger than any of us. His tone had shifted from dominance to desperation, from king to cornered animal. Jasmine rose slowly, her presence commanding the chaos into silence. When she spoke, her words cut with the inevitability of a verdict. The truth is not a witch hunt. The truth is a mirror, and it does not lie. Her voice carried above the uproar, steady as iron. Every name, every dollar, every word in these files, none of it can be erased. Not with shouting, not with power, not with fear. What has been hidden is now revealed, and the people will decide what comes next. The gallery erupted in cheers, in outrage, in disbelief, an explosion of voices that shook the chamber walls. Trump stood motionless, his skin pale, his jaw clenched, the strength drained from his frame. For the first time, he looked smaller. But behind the roar of victory and collapse, one truth flickered like a hidden flame. The leak was too vast, the shadows too many. This was not just about him anymore, and the storm that had begun would not stop at a single name. It would consume everyone it touched. The chamber shook with noise, outrage, disbelief, applause, fear. It was no longer a hearing. It was an earthquake. Trump rose slowly, gripping the edge of the desk as though the world beneath him had tilted. For a moment, silence threatened to swallow him whole. But then his voice broke through, booming with the rage of a man who refused to concede. "This is nothing but a circus," he thundered. "Fabrications, lies, political theater designed to tear me down because they know they can't defeat me any other way. You think a few hacked files will end me? You think whispers and shadows can bury me? Wrong. Dead wrong." He slammed his fist into the wood, the sound echoing like a drumbeat of defiance. "I will not be beaten. Not by cowards hiding behind keyboards. Not by traitors sitting in this very room. And certainly not by you." His eyes cut across the chamber, landing squarely on Jasmine. Cameras zoomed in. The networks drank it in. The image, Trump, defiant, roaring at the storm, even as cracks spread through the ground beneath him. Jasmine did not flinch. Her stillness was more powerful than his fury. She stood, her figure calm, composed but unyielding, like a blade balanced in the air. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of history. "Mr. Trump, justice is not a plaything. It is not a game of power or money. It is not yours to command." Her words drew the room into silence, every syllable sinking like stone into water. Justice may stumble. It may be delayed. It may be fought with lies, drowned in wealth, hidden in darkness. She paused, her gaze sweeping the chamber, making sure no one could escape her words. But justice cannot be buried. The line cut through the hall like lightning. For a moment, the chaos hushed, leaving only the echo of her voice hanging in the charged air. Then the explosion came. Half the chamber erupted in thunderous applause, cheers, chants, the pounding of hands against desks. The other half erupted in outrage, boos and shouts, fingers pointing, voices rising in fury. The sound was not unity but war. The cameras caught everything. Screens across the nation filled with the split image. One side roaring with approval, the other seething with anger. A perfect fracture, broadcast live. The chairman hammered the gavel so hard it nearly splintered. "Order! Order in this chamber!" But no one listened anymore. This was bigger than order, bigger than rules, bigger than the walls that tried to contain it. Trump stood at his desk, shoulders heaving, jaw clenched. But beneath the fury in his eyes, there was something else. A flicker of unease, a shadow of doubt he could not quite hide. He had survived many storms before, but this one was different. This one carried proof, voices, names. Jasmine's words lingered in the air like a sentence already passed. He knew it, and so did everyone watching. Yet as the cameras pulled back, capturing the chaos, the division, the very cracking of the nation in real time, one truth was clear. The battle was not over. Not by a long shot. Trump leaned forward, gripping the microphone one last time. This fight has just begun. Mark my words. His vow rang like a threat, a promise that the darkness still had teeth. The cameras shifted to Jasmine, her face resolute, unshaken, a beacon in the storm. If his words were a threat, hers had already been a prophecy. The broadcast ended on the wide shot. Rows of divided lawmakers, shouts clashing with cheers, history itself dangling in the balance. And though the gavel fell again and again, the curtain refused to close. Because everyone in that chamber knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. In the clash between power and truth, the world was reminded of a simple eternal law. Lies may roar, but they cannot endure. What begins in shadows will one day be dragged into the light. This story was never just about two voices on opposite sides of a chamber. It was about the courage to stand when silence is easier, the strength to speak when words are dangerous, and the faith that justice, however delayed, will always find its way. And in that lesson lies our calling, to choose integrity even when the storm rages. If this story shook you, don't just move on. Pause, think, share it. Let it spark a conversation that others are too afraid to start. Like comment and send it to someone who still believes courage can stand against corruption. Subscribe to Harrison's Stories, where power is questioned and silence is never an option. Hit the bell because the storm isn't over. The next chapter isn't just a tale, it's a mirror, and it might just change how you see justice. This story is a fictional dramatization, drawn from the shadows of real struggles and real bravery. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental, or a symbol meant for reflection and critique. Thank you for watching. Justice is not a gift, it's a fight. This is Harrison Stories.